On today's episode of the SSPX podcast, we'll continue our apologetic series by turning towards ourselves. Father Albert will join us to look at man himself. We've spent the last 3 episodes looking at the existence of God. Now we need to know about us. We know that we exist. That part is easy, but what are we made for? What is our purpose? Or in more apologetical terms, what is the nature of man? This is going to influence all the rest of the episode, so Father Albert will help us to get a good foundation on this concept today. You can find notes to all of these episodes at sspxpodcast.com/apologetics, as well as all our previous episodes. There as well, you can find a link to help support this project. This is free to listen to, as well as all the resources that we're posting, but if you can help with a one-time or a small monthly recurring donation, you'll be making sure that we can continue this work of producing good Catholic content on a regular basis. Now, let's join Father Albert for episode number 4 of the Apologetic series. Well, we are here with our next episode on our Apologetic series, and happy to welcome Father Albert. Hello, Father. How are you?
Fine. How are you, Andrew? Nice to be here.
Doing very well, thank you. Thank you. Great to have you as well. And for those who may not know who you are or haven't seen you before, Father, could you just give us a couple sentences about who you are and where you are currently?
I come from Western Canada. I spent most of my priestly life in France, the Dominicans and Avrier. Presently, I am in Silver City, New Mexico, with the Benedictine monks, where I'm teaching philosophy and doing some preaching in different parts of the country. And doing podcasts.
And doing podcasts, that's right. Well, we are so happy that you took the time to put together this talk for us, and for taking the time to record it. And our viewers might see one of the Benedictine brothers walking behind you doing some work. Their work never ends, even if we are recording a podcast here. So thanks for carving out the time, Father.
That's fine.
Well, today we are talking about man. And we've talked about God, we've talked about the existence of God, we've talked about creation already with Father Robinson, we've talked about evolution. Now we get to talk about us, man. So where would you like to start in this discussion of the concept of man,
We can start
Father?
with a quote of Bob Dylan. What do you mean by man, man? What he said was, what do you mean by me, man? We can change the one letter and say, what do you mean by man, man? Because what does man mean? That's the whole question we're supposed to deal with now.
Right.
In the first episodes, we saw that God exists. Well, now we have to talk about man and how he fits into the picture. So what do we mean by man, man? What is man? That's the question. So we just start with the definition of man. The classic definition of man is a rational animal. Now, that's a perfect definition because you've got the genus and the species. The genus is animal. Man is an animal, but he's a specific kind of animal. He's a rational animal. So that's what makes him different from the other animals, is that he's rational. So let's just jump right into it and talk about the genus. First of all, the animal. That's the easy part. By animal, we mean a body that is a material thing, but a special kind of body, a body that's alive. And not only alive, because even plants, for example, are bodies that are alive. Animal is a alive body that has sensation. That's what makes animals different from other living bodies. It's that they have sensation. Plants don't really have sensation. Now, there's always sort of these borderline cases. They talk about these animals, these plants, rather, that are sort of like animals, these plants that can snap out and eat flies, for example. Well, that's a plant that's kind of on the borderline between animals and plants, because it actually sense that there's a fly there and moves and grabs it. But these exceptions just prove the rule. Plant is normally can't do that. And so these special kind of plants kind of act like animals, but it just proves that there is a real difference between plants and animals. it shows that the border is really there because they can sort of cross over it. So man fits into this general category of things that have sensitive life. So if we want to know what man is, what we are, first of all, we have to talk about the senses. First of all, the five exterior senses. Everybody knows, sight, hearing, and smell, taste, and touch. But there's also what are called the interior senses, which maybe people haven't really heard about that much or talked about that much, although they know what they are, obviously. Those are the interior senses are what's called the common sense. I'll explain that in a minute. Memory, imagination, and what's called the estimative sense, which is another kind of thing that needs a little bit of explanation. First of all, the common sense. That doesn't mean what it means in normal language, right? Common sense, you have somebody who has common sense, it means they're sort of, they know how to sort of react normally in different situations. In philosophy, common sense means this sense that is a power by which we are conscious of what our external senses tell us. And that's a simple fact of life. It's experience. We see that we see, and we know that we're seeing. We have a sense that we're seeing and hearing and tasting. And so this common sense kind of puts together all these different data that come from our exterior senses. And we can be aware that we are sensing, because sense itself doesn't sense itself. It senses its object, color or smell or odor, or whatever the particular object of this sense is. So there has to be an interior sense, as we call it, by this special word, interior senses, which is aware that what the senses are doing, because the senses themselves don't sense sensing. So that's the first interior sense. The second one is more common sense. We know about it. It's called imagination. It's this power to store up images in our soul. It's something that everybody realizes that they have, and it's an interior sense because it's not directly sensing something. It's rather recalling something that has been sensed previously. So there must be a power that's able to do that, because we know we do that. It's a fact of experience. We don't always, even something we've experienced with our exterior senses before, we can recall by this faculty that's called, if recall's not the right word, we can reproduce by this power this image that we had, and that's power is called imagination. The power that recalls is a new faculty, and that's the third interior sense, which is called memory. It's fistus. Again, to something experience, we know that we can reproduce these images that we've taken from our sense experience, and we can make a movie of them, sort of. We can play them again. And that's called a memory. And finally, the fourth interior sense is something a little bit more mysterious. It's called the estimative power. It's that by which the animal senses things which are not the object of any of this exterior senses. The example that's always given is a lamb senses it has to flee from the wolf. It's not because of the color of the wolf or the smell of the wolf necessarily right away. I mean, it's not immediately. I mean, it just knows somehow that it should flee the wolf, and it does. And so there must be some sort of faculty in this animal which makes it recognize that this is a harmful thing to it. in normal language, this is what's called instinct. It's this
Okay.
sense that animals have that something's bad or good for them. It's always be something good, just the way they, birds that build nests, for example, they know, they just know how to do that somehow.
Sure.
It's instinct, okay. And that's something, everybody realizes that's just part of animals. They know how to do that. And we have that as well. It's a little bit different in us because of our reason, sheds a certain intellectual light on these capabilities. That's why it's a little bit higher than instinct, but basically it's the same thing. It's different because it's in us and we have reason. I think we'll talk about it in a minute. But it's basically the same thing. In technical terms, and in men, it's called the cogitative power. You cogitate on things. You got this sort of instinct, and you just do things. But because you have reason, it's not complete. It's not just an instinct. The reason is involved in a certain way.
So this is the main difference between animals and man is this boundary between instinct, so to speak, senses and instinct and reason. So we can know that there is something, and we know that there is something, whereas an animal might know something and instinctively flee from the wolf, like you said, but it doesn't necessarily know that it knows that.
Exactly. It just flees and doesn't need to. It's programmed, you see. And that's part of, we have that as well. So, it's interesting. Pascal, the French philosopher, writer, talks about that when he's talking in his book where his Apologetics. They just called the book Pensée, which means thoughts, because he never finished it. But the title that he had for the book was The Apologetic for the Christian Religion. And one of the things he counsels people to do, he says, take holy water. If you want to believe, take holy water. And he said, and he explains, he says, because we're half animal, if we do something, just a habit, a physical habit, that will end up getting into us. He said, take holy water and you'll believe. Because we're partly animal. It's part of our nature. We're not just animals, but it's true that we have this instinct, and it is, and you see it in the church. You've got you take holy water, right? And you've got these smells and bells, as they call them. Well, that's normal. Right. It's part of our nature. We can't just suppress that. But we're not just that. Okay, that's the genus, the animal part. Then there's what makes us different from the animal, which is reason. So we have to talk about that. It's what actually defines us and makes us different from the animals. Now, it's true, there's some animals that seem to have reason. Again, there's the borderline cases, like monkeys, for example. They seem to do things like men do, or they talk about dolphins being able to do certain things as if they were intelligent. But in fact, they are. I mean, it's just a fact. And dolphins and monkeys are not men. And what distinguishes them from man is the fact that they don't have reason, and we do. And one of the clearest signs of that is that they don't talk. They might make signs. Other animals make signs as well, but a sign is not the same thing as talking. A sign is just a sign. It can mean something in a way, but to be able to talk, you've got to have something to say. And what you say when you talk is you communicate an idea. Animals don't do that. They might make signs, but they don't talk. That's just, that's a fairy tale. Or animals don't communicate in the sense of talking. They have a certain communication, perhaps, but that's, they don't write books or they don't have conversations because they don't have universal ideas. And that comes from the reason. So that's what distinguishes man from animals. It's this fact that we have a universal idea. For example, that's what we can say sentences, because we take two universal ideas and we put them together. There's a subject and a predicate, and both of them are universal ideas. For example, man and fat. This man is fat. We know what fatness is, and we know what man is, and we could say about this particular man that this man is fat, and it means something. It's a communication of a truth. So we know universal truth by a reason, and that's what distinguishes us from the animals. Now we can go on from that, from this little fact. It leads us farther, even a lot farther, because the fact that we have these universal ideas that separate us, that are separate from particular material things, which you can sense particular material things with your senses. But to have an idea is separate from the universal things. Now, the fact that you can do that means that you have something in you that's immaterial, that transcends matter, because you don't just have particular sensations of particular things. You have universal ideas which transcend matter. So if you can do something that transcends matter, then that means that you must have something that's immaterial in yourself. Because the scholastic adage is agere sequitur esse. What you do, acting, follows being. In other words, what you do depends on what you are. And that's just common sense. And so what something does depends on what it is. And then a bird flies because it has wings. It can do that, fly, because it has wings. And men, they can, because they have this capacity to know universal ideas, well, they must, which is immaterial, and there must be something in them that's immaterial that allows them to do that. Otherwise, they couldn't do it. So there must be something in man which is immaterial. So you see how important this distinction between thought and sensation is. It really opens up a whole world, an immaterial world for man. And it tells us a lot about even his destiny, because if he does these things which are material, he must have some element in him which transcends matter, which leads us even further, because if there's something in man that is immaterial, then man is immortal. Now, what could be more practical than that, right? Now, to understand that, we have to go into a little bit of philosophy, but matter, in fact, is the principle of corruption in things. Because as Aristotle shows, that's precisely what matter is. It's this principle that must exist in things to explain the fact that what was one thing all of a sudden becomes something else. Like something else entirely. Now, I don't know, shall we go into that or not?
Sure. I mean, yeah, that's starting to make sense.
Because, okay, now hang on. This is a little bit, you might never ever thought of it this way before. For example,
Okay.
What was a piece of wood a minute ago now is a pile of ashes. Now, that's what the Greeks would call substantial change. It's the fact that what was one thing suddenly changes and becomes something entirely different. And for the Greeks, who actually thought, the only probably race of the whole human race actually started to think, that's amazing. You have one thing that was one thing, and it becomes something completely different. Now, how can that be? Because this was wood, and now it's ashes. And it's It's not completely different because what was wood is now ashes. It's the same thing that was wood that is now ashes. So there must be something underneath
Right.
that remains, and yet it's completely different. Wood is wood and ashes and ashes. It's not the same thing at all. And so that's what matter is. It's this thing that's underneath substantial change. It's what was wood is ashes. So it's something completely different. And yet this thing underneath is this potentiality to be one thing and then be another thing after. It's pure potentiality. That's what matter is. Now, if there's matter, then there can be substantial change. It's what matter is. It explains a substantial change. But if there is no matter, then there can't be substantial change. So if man has this element in him which is immaterial, then that must be immortal. Because it doesn't have matter. And matter is the principle that explains the one thing can change into another thing completely. So if something doesn't have that, well, then it can't become something other completely. It just is what it is. Now, in philosophy, we learn that anything that's like that has to be intelligent because it can receive the forms of other things intentionally. Okay. But we're not. That's not our subject, so we won't go into that. But that's what you learn in psychology. But that at least explains then if something has no matter, then it can become something else because that's what matter is. It's this potentiality to become something else. So it remains what it is because all it is what it is. That is the form. Because the form is what makes a thing be what it is. So if there is no matter, well, then it just is what it is, and it's not going to change. So because man then has this immaterial aspect in him, which is what separates him from animals, it makes him immortal. So that then, obviously, is going to take us even farther. I mean, the fact that man is immaterial and has this immortal aspect to him is going to determine his purpose. Because the purpose of a thing is the activity in which its nature achieves its perfection. And so since man has this faculty of intelligence, which raises him above animals, makes him more perfect than animals, then his purpose, the reason for his being, is to exercise this activity, to attain his good. Because the purpose of everything is to attain its good. That's what good is, precisely what good is. It's to fulfill, to become perfect, to have this activity which fulfills your being. And since the highest faculty in man is intelligence, the purpose of man, his end, is going to be to perfect his intelligence. And that's makes his beatitude, which is basically a fancy word for his happiness. So the perfection and happiness of man depends on this fact that his nature is intellectual. So we've already come quite a ways talking about what man is. It's by his intellect that he's different from animals, and that's going to be his perfection then is to know the truth. Because he can't be happy unless he attains the perfection of this highest part of his being. And the perfection of this highest part of his being is to know the truth. Again, adjudate sequitur esse. Because that's his nature, like an intellectual nature, then his happiness is going to consist in acting according to that nature and fulfilling the potentialities of that nature, which is to know the truth.
Wow.
So that leads us into another whole part of consideration of man, which is much more practical. You have to start with what man is, But then, as I said, it leads to what man does, and it's what man does that makes him happy. So this is what leads us into the whole consideration of morality. Because that's what morality is. It's considering acts, human acts, from the perspective of how they perfect man's nature and make him happy, or give him beatitude. So that's the whole second part of the Summa of St. Thomas is all about beatitude. These acts which we have to perform in order to attain our perfection, our happiness. So that's what morality is. It's the acts of man considered in relation to their last end. But the end, doesn't mean like the end. Sort of the end doesn't mean sort of, well, it's all over, finished. In a way, it's just the opposite. The end is the perfection of man. It's the purpose of man. And you attain your beatitude by attaining your purpose. So St. Thomas has this whole section of the Summa, the second part of the Summa, which is the longest part of the Summa, all about, man's happiness and how to attain it. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit to finish.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. So when we're talking about the material things, just to recap a little bit, you're saying the underlying thing that makes material things that makes them material is the fact that they will undergo some sort of a change or potentiality. This is kind of similar to, I think if I'm remembering correctly, the second law of thermodynamics that says everything is entropy, right? Everything is going to change at some point. So everything material is going to change. Everything material has that potentiality to become something else, but the soul doesn't, because it is immaterial, therefore it is also immortal, therefore we have a purpose. So it's just kind of leading us down this step of what is the purpose of man? Well, it's not necessarily our bodies, it's our immaterial soul and our immortal soul.
Exactly. You see how important philosophy is. It's just logical.
Right.
And that's what we're going to explain in this part. That's what St. Thomas explains, especially the first 5 questions in this second part. He talks about beatitude. The beatitude of man. What is the beatitude of man? What is it we have? Because that's what determines what we have to do in order to attain our end and be happy. So he has this whole section to begin. What is the end of man? What is his perfection of man? And so he goes through these different considerations of what men have thought beatitude consists in. Because everybody wants to be happy. That's just bottom line. You can't help but want to be happy. The problem is where is happiness and what does it consist? And that's a very important question, at least practically, because as we said, what you do brings you to the fulfillment of your being. So you have to do what brings you to the fulfillment of your being. And if you don't, you won't arrive to the fulfillment of your being. You won't be happy. So it's very absolutely vital, literally, to know what is it in what consists the beatitude of man. Right? So that's what he talks about. He goes through these different possibilities of what different men have thought is their beatitude. So we can go through it if you want, just a little bit.
Sure.
To see what St. Thomas says about that.
Okay.
So I'll just read a phrase of St. Maximilian Kolbe. He talks about this. All men seek happiness and hope to attain it, but few are they who find it, because they look for it where it is not to be found. Okay, so we'll go through these different goods which people seek, hoping to find their beatitude, because every act we do, that's the only reason we do it, is because to attain our happiness. But the problem is some people, as he says, don't find it because they look for it where it is not to be found. So St. Thomas conducts this long investigation into the different goods of man and tries to discover in which of them is found true beatitude. So first of all, he explains, beatitude does not consist in riches, because riches are simply a means of acquiring natural goods, like food or drink or other things. So man's beatitude can't consist in riches because riches is simply a means of attaining good. As St. Thomas says, for all these things are sought after, food, drink, habitations, etc., because of something else. So we want money, so we get these things, food, drink, etc. But all these things are sought after because of something else, namely in order to sustain the nature of man. And therefore, they cannot be the last end of man, but rather are ordered to man as to their end. As it is said in the Psalm, thou hast put all things under his feet. Okay, it's sort of, this is famous, you can't live to eat because we just eat to live. So eating cannot be our final end because that itself is just ordered to us. So we can't be ordered to it. It's pretty simple. And riches are simply means of attaining these things. So riches cannot be, our beatitude cannot consist in material riches. Secondly, he goes on and explains that beatitude does not consist in honor, which is another good that people seek. And in some people even put their last in honor. And he says this is because honor is given to excellence. That's what honor is. It's this homage that you pay to excellence. And so honor supposes excellence. But beatitude is what makes a man excellent. So it doesn't consist in honor, but rather honor is rather a consequence of beatitude. Because it's the homage that you pay to excellence or perfection, but beatitude is that excellence or perfection. So it can't consist in the honor because honor is just a consequence of perfection, right? So, and yet a lot of people do that, right? And there's an objection here from Aristotle, who points out the fact that the reward of virtue is honor. And beatitude is the reward of virtue as well. So honor and beatitude seem to be the same thing because both of them are the reward of virtue. Now, the answer to that is that the honor is the reward of virtue in the sense that it's not the reward of virtue in the sense that one is virtuous in order to be honored, because that would just be ambition. If you just, were virtuous in order to be honored by other people, well, that's not the way it works. That's just ambition. You seek the honor of people as your last end. You seek to be good so that people honor you. Well, it's the other way around. Honor is what you're given if you have virtue, but it's not the reason why you seek virtue. Beatitude, on the contrary, is the virtuous person himself. He is because he's virtuous, he has happiness, and because he has this happiness, then he's honored. But honor is beatitude doesn't consist in honor. It's rather honor is given to someone who has beatitude, which is to be virtuous, as we're going to explain in a minute. All right. Okay. That's what we call, for example, the saints. We call them the blessed. And that's why they honor them, because they have attained beatitude. That is, by their virtue, they have become perfect. And so they're worthy of our honor. But the honor is a consequence of this perfection of beatitude. Doesn't consist in that. But again, a lot of people, that's what they live for, is to be praised by other people. But they've got it backwards, you see. And another possibility, which is similar a bit to honor, For some people, beatitude consists in glory, which is the knowledge of something accompanied by praise, says St. Thomas. For example, a great basketball player has glory because of his great playing, and seen on TV, and everybody praises him. They give him glory. But this praise doesn't cause the beatitude of this basketball player. His beatitude consists rather in his playing. He's a great basketball player. That's his beatitude. And again, glory, just like honor, is a consequence of it. It doesn't consist in beatitude doesn't consist in glory. Glory is a consequence of being blessed, being a great basketball player. St. Thomas adds on this point, though, he flips it around a bit, saying that it's true that in a way, our beatitude depends on our glory before God. So our beatitude is our glory, not before men, but before God. And he explains that our beatitude depends on our glory before God because God's knowledge of our excellence isn't caused by our excellence, it's rather the cause of our excellence. When God knows things, he's not passive with regard to them. Well, good. With regard to good, things are good because God loves them. He doesn't love them because they're good. So things are not praised by God because they're good. Rather, they're good because God praises them. So in that sense, our glory before God is the cause of our beatitude. And we could say our beatitude consists in our glory before God because our glory before God is the cause of our beatitude. It's because he wills our good that we have it. So this glory we have before God is actually is our beatitude because it's God that causes our glory. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, to just finish the list, man's beatitude doesn't consist in power because power can be used for good or for evil. So it's not goodness in itself because, if you use your power for good, then it's a good thing. But if you use power for evil, and it's not a good thing, it's a very bad. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, man's beatitude does not consist in any good of the body, strength or beauty, etc., because this good itself, as we sort of said before, is ordered to the good of the soul. And that's proven by the simple fact that the body cannot exist without the soul. So while the soul can exist without the body, which we talked about before. Therefore, the body exists for the soul and not the other way around. And so the good of the body can't be our beatitude, that is our ultimate good, because it's ordered to something else. It is the good of the soul. And it's a very simple argument, and yet how many people put their beatitude in their strength or beauty? It's an error.
Right.
Also, he goes on, another common error is to say the beatitude consists in pleasure. And, obviously this consists in bodily pleasure. We've just seen that because the body is for the soul. But neither does it consist in any kind of pleasure, even spiritual pleasure. Because pleasure or delight is simply a consequence of possessing the good. So it cannot be that very possession. We experience delight when we possess our good, but it isn't that good itself, precisely because it's the consequence of it. It's the consequence of it. Our goodness cannot consist in delight. Delight is a consequence of having the good, so it can't be the good itself. And in practice, that's an error that we all make, more or less. But it's an error. We have to embrace what is truly our good, and we will experience delight, but it's not by embracing delight itself that we will attain our good and so our delight. Again, that's a fact of experience. We know that if we just sort of go for something that is pleasurable, even if it's a spiritual pleasure, we know that we end up without pleasure, because we have to embrace what will give truth or light, and not the life itself.
Wow.
Finally, St. Thomas concludes with the following argument that man's beatitude can only consist in God himself. So we're getting to the final conclusion of this whole section. Because man's beatitude must completely fulfill his desire. And so it must consist in obtaining the very object of his will, and so fulfill its desire. But the object of man's will is not just a particular good. We talked about that before. Animals, they have particular goods, but because we have this faculty of reason, we know the idea of universal good. So that's the object of our desire, is not just a particular good, but universal good in itself. Now, the Dominican commentator St. Thomas Cajetan explains the key premise of this argument, which is the parallel drawn between universal object of the intellect and the universal object of the will. And he recalls the difference between the respective objects of the intellect and the will, namely the truth, which is the object of the intellect, and the good, which is the object of the will. The truth is in the intellect, because it consists in this adequation of the intellect to what really is. So truth is something that's in the intellect itself. The good, however, which is the object of the will, is in the things themselves, because it doesn't consist in the correspondence between the will and the loves and the thing it loves, as truth consists in correspondence between the intellect and what it knows. Rather, it's the opposite. Goodness is in the thing itself that's loved, which is loved because it's good. And so goodness is in the object loved, and it causes that love. And so it's not in the will. Goodness isn't in the will, as truth is in the intellect. Goodness is in the thing that's good, and which is love, because it's good, it's external, it's objective. And so the universal absolute good, which is the object of the will, as he explained, we can't be happy unless we have this universal absolute good. Well, it's something real, and it's outside of us. And so it can't be anything but God himself, because God is the absolute real good of the whole universe. And that's why only God can give man the beatitude that he seeks, because, as our Lord himself says to the young man, rich man, called him good, he says, only God is good. That is, only God is the universal absolute good that can alone satisfy man's desire. That's what St. Augustine said. Our heart is restless until it rests in thee, because only God is the universal good, and it's only that universal good that can satisfy this intellectual appetite, which is the will. Its object is this universal good. So we can sum up then this whole thing. I'll just sort of read it. Neither riches, nor honor, nor glory, nor power, nor pleasure can make men happy, because they do not satisfy this innate desire he has for an infinite good. And this desire comes to man precisely because of his intellect, which attains the universal nature of things, as we explained, and what makes him different from the animals. And so no particular good can satisfy man, because he has this notion of universal good that is good in itself, and knowing this, he cannot help but desire it. And the freedom of the will, which is a very important point, we haven't dwelt on, but it consists simply in the fact that we have this desire for an infinite good. So nothing particular that we experience in our lives can constrain the will to make it love it, because it doesn't fulfill the will completely. It could always say no, because this particular good doesn't satisfy it completely. Whereas in heaven, the blessed who see their infinite good, which is God, which satisfies superabundantly their desire for the good. See, they can't turn away. I mean, it's kind of paradoxical. They can't turn away, and yet it's free. Just as God loves himself and can't help but love himself, and yet he loves himself free. So anyway, that's the conclusion, is that only God is good. And I think that's what is going to be talked about in the next podcast. We're going to talk about religion, because that's how we attain our good.
Father, this is great, and I love apologetics so much because it's very clear, it's very logical, it takes you step by step. Yes, faith is necessary for religion, faith is necessary for our faith, but none of this is relying on, faith. It's just logical, step by step.
Right, it's what's called the preamble of faith. That is, there's certain things that come before the act of faith. It's not just sort of a blind leap into the dark. Some Protestants have that idea. I remember I had this conversation with a Protestant girl once, a long time ago. She said, I'd believe that Jonah swallowed the whale if it was in the Bible. Well, that's not Catholic. That's just stupid.
Right.
Our faith is reasonable. It surpasses reason. But St. Thomas says, to make the act of faith, we have to be sure that it's a reasonable act. And that's what all of these preliminary principles to the faith are about. And then also the apologetic proofs of the truth of the faith. We can, God has given rational proofs of the truth of the religion that he's revealed. Faith is not that. Faith is adhering to this supernatural motive of faith, which is God reveals, and that's something completely supernatural, and it's a gift. But we can't make that act unless it's reason. I mean, it's these proofs of apologetics that show that we can do that.
Right. Father, this has been excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through this with us. And I'm sure we'll have you back on another time for another one of these at some point in the future. So thank you again.
All right. I look forward to it. God bless you.
All right. You too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Apologetic series on the SSPX podcast and on our YouTube page. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube account and the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are found. And please consider leaving a rating or a review on this podcast. This will help to make sure more people can find this podcast and discover the beauty and the truth of traditional Catholicism. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and God bless you.